All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to our friends on the West Coast. Welcome to the third webinar of our three-part hiring series. Today's presentation is on how to reinforce your culture with a strong onboarding process, brought to you today by Outmatch, leaders in transforming the world of work. My name is Charles Summers. It is my pleasure to be serving as your moderator during this hour. And just a quick thank you to our nearly 1,000 registrants for today's webinar. It's a big one. If you'd like to get in touch with me about future webinar topics, Outmatch-specific information, or would like to speak with one of our many talent experts, reach out by email at csummers@outmatch.com, or you can just chat in your comments. We recently launched the Outmatch platform, which delivers a highly predictive talent selection software platform that supports hiring and employee development decisions using pre-employment assessments and talent analytics. Through the platform, we will transform your workplace by infusing data and predictive models into your talent strategy, ultimately reducing turnover, strengthening culture, and driving company performance. As Outmatch's capabilities continue to grow, we'd like you to grow with us. So when you have a chance, head to the website and check out all of our expert resources, sign up for a future webinar, and get the full scoop on Outmatch and Pomelo products by scheduling a tour at outmatch.com/schedule-a-demo. We are also offering a free expert talent analysis to today's attendees. This is a one-on-one time with an expert to review your organization's talent strategy and uncover issues that might be standing in the way of success. Our analysis covers talent acquisition, onboarding, employee and leadership development, and culture initiatives. You'll receive insights, recommended solutions, and expected outcomes based on your current challenges and goals. You'll be prompted at the end of the webinar with a survey, or you can follow the link in my follow-up email to schedule your time. As a thank you for joining us today, all attendees will receive a free copy of our latest white paper, The Business Case for Hourly Assessments, 3 Risks Associated with Just Hiring. We know that the war for talent is extremely competitive right now, and that's why it's important to give hiring managers the tools they need to be successful. This piece will help build your business case for providing such tools in your selection process. This will also be in that same email after the webinar, as well as the slide decks from today's presentation. If you'd like the recording from today's presentation, please email me directly at csummers@outmatch.com, or you can go to outmatch.com/webinars to find all of our on-demand webinars. At this time, please take a moment to follow Outmatch on Twitter @OutmatchHCM and tweet questions, thoughts, or quotes as you're listening by using the hashtag OutmatchInsights. You can also interact with us using the questions queue in your GoToWebinar status window. Please feel free to ask questions, make comments, or share feedback at any point during the webcast. Again, you can also tweet your questions or comments to @OutmatchHCM with a hashtag OutmatchInsights. The feature presentation will take approximately 45 minutes, and following that, we will have some time set aside for a Q&A session with our presenter. Now I'd like to introduce our presenter, Chelsea Petrie. Chelsea has a background in IO psychology and works with clients to find the most impactful solutions to support their talent selection and employee development needs. She helps organizations identify top talent across all their jobs and then maximize their talent potential through targeted development solutions. So at this time, I'd like to hand it off to Chelsea. So Chelsea, go ahead and take it away.
Great. Thank you everyone for joining us today, and thank you, Charles, for the introduction. I'm especially excited to be speaking about the importance of culture today, as we have recently begun working with more and more clients on how to create and sustain a strong culture within their organization. In fact, with new tools allowing companies to better measure and track culture, leaders are now more equipped than ever to effectively manage it. Whether you have a strong culture already or you're looking to build or change it, leadership does indeed have the ability to make a meaningful impact on the behaviors attitudes, and even mindsets of their employee population. While there are many aspects of talent management that can be leveraged to impact your culture, today we'll be focusing specifically on the talent acquisition process, which I define as starting with the recruiting process and continuing through the onboarding process. We'll try to answer some key questions, including, why does it matter if my organization does or does not have a strong culture? How do I improve my selection processes to ensure that I am considering culture fit in addition to job fit? And finally, how can I leverage the onboarding process to reinforce my organization's culture? We hope to make this time engaging and conversational, so I encourage lots of participation and questions. All right, and with that, let's jump right in with our first poll. And don't worry, this isn't a pop quiz. There are no right or wrong answers. Rather, we just want to get you thinking about where your organization is at the moment. So think about your organization's current talent acquisition processes, starting from recruiting and continuing through onboarding. How well do these processes truly reflect your organization's culture? Or put differently, if you were a candidate and then a new hire at your company, would you already have a strong sense of the culture by the time onboarding was complete? Okay, gonna give everyone a few seconds to answer that.
Yeah, and Chelsea, it looks like we've got about 50% of our audience that's voted, now 60%.
Okay, fantastic. Well, it looks like we have a pretty good spread here. We have listeners on the webinar today whose organizations already ensure their talent acquisition processes reflect their culture, and we have others whose organizations are just getting started. So wherever you are, hopefully you'll find something helpful today to either kickstart your culture initiatives or take them to the next level.
So I went ahead and shared that poll there. So everybody should be able to see the poll results on their screen right now.
Okay. All right, Charles, let's jump ahead to that next slide for me.
Okay.
All right. So before we dive in, let's tackle some common questions like, what is culture exactly? Company culture emerged as a concept in the 1980s and 1990s, and the first academic studies emerged around this time as well. Similar to engagement, there are a number of different functional definitions of organizational culture, but most center around the concepts of values and assumptions which contribute to the development of norms, behaviors, and other cultural activities. If values tend to be more conceptual in nature, the norms and behaviors are the more concrete building blocks that make these values have meaning. So think about an innovation as a potential core value. For example, what does that mean in terms of behavior? At Outmatch, we'd argue that innovative cultures are characterized by employees who are willing to experiment, who are comfortable with risk, and who are quick to take initiative. These are the behaviors that underpin this value. In addition, an additional critical element in understanding organizational culture is the way that an individual may relate to workplace culture. Just as employee engagement allows for an employee to interact on an individual level with their workplace and their job, our understanding of culture allows for individuals to view different cultures as being more or less attractive. Think about the much vilified culture at Amazon. Is it possible that rather than being a culture that is fundamentally bad, it's just a culture that doesn't work for some people? Perhaps it is the type of culture that works for hard-driving, aggressive, results-focused individuals. These are the people who will thrive at a company like Amazon. Company culture can therefore be thought of in the HR framework of attraction, selection, and retention by effectively narrowing the ideal employees for a workplace based on alignment around cultural values and norms. So when taken as a whole, company culture is simply a set of shared beliefs around what is expected, valued, and rewarded in the workplace. This shared understanding plays a large role in determining who gets hired, who is promoted, and who departs from a specific organization. All right, so now we're all on the same page regarding how to define and understand company culture. Now what? What use is knowing this concept impacts my company if I can't do anything about it? Well, the good news is that while culture might seem a bit intangible, it's actually very malleable and manageable. Which brings us to our next question. How can we manage corporate culture? The traditional approach to company culture was through one-on-one interactions, consistent communication, and alignment of incentive systems. These components are all still critically important to managing company culture effectively. But more recently, new technology has emerged that attempts to quantify or measure company culture by applying survey and analytics technology in a similar fashion to the way we measure and monitor employee engagement. The more culture insights that technology can provide organizations, the more proactive leadership can be in intentionally aligning talent management strategies to meet and reflect that culture. Well, we can monitor and measure culture in a similar fashion to employee engagement. The two constructs are not interchangeable, contrary to popular belief. So I thought it was important to address this final common culture question. What is the difference between employee engagement and culture? Because employee engagement and company culture both involve an individual's relationship with their workplace, it is very easy to see why they're so often confused. That said, there is a very clear distinction. Employee engagement is how employees feel, whereas culture is what employees believe and how they act. You might be wondering now if one is more important than the other, or why you need to care about both. Both are important for understanding what is happening within your organization. The formal relationship is that culture strength will predict employee engagement. That is, the stronger culture, the higher the employee engagement. There are some important differences in how engagement and culture trends emerge over time. Culture predicts engagement, but beliefs and behaviors are slow to change. Engagement is a critical output of a strong culture, but over short periods of time will be more volatile than culture. The most important characteristic to remember when thinking about employee engagement is that it is a point-in-time assessment of how employees are feeling about their company and their work. Employee engagement can fluctuate quite frequently depending on a number of different factors. Your engagement score might change from month to month or even week to week. Every company is different, and we see companies increasingly moving away from annual surveys because of this reason. Typically, companies move towards a quarterly or monthly survey when modernizing their engagement metrics. For example, a down month of sales can negatively impact engagement while the culture remains strong. The engagement insight is important to keep tabs on in this scenario, but is not by itself cause for alarm. That's because a blow to engagement on a team with a strong culture will rebound over time. However, a low engagement score accompanied by trends towards lower culture strength indicates that there's a breakdown in beliefs and behaviors happening on that team. In this scenario, a manager would need to evaluate why that breakdown is occurring. So to sum it up, engagement's more emotional. It's about how employees feel, and it's volatile, where culture is getting at employee beliefs and behaviors, which tend to be much more stable over time. All right, now that we are all on the same page regarding the basics of company culture, let's talk about why it matters. There are a lot of real tangible benefits to having this strong corporate culture. The first, of course, is higher employee engagement. To reiterate, the stronger the culture, the higher the engagement. And this should make intuitive sense. If employees are highly aligned around the beliefs, values, behaviors, and incentives that drive how they act in the workplace, then strong alignment will lead to less social friction and higher productivity. This feeds into a higher level of employee engagement on average. Similarly, we tend to see better performance in strong organizational cultures. This too makes intuitive sense. If an employee works for a culture who shares his or her values, he or she is more likely to display the behaviors that will make them successful within that environment. Additionally, he or she is more likely to be motivated by the organization's leaders, incentives, or even its challenges. Now let's talk about brand image. This one might not seem quite as intuitive. Why should customers or clients care if you have a strong work culture or not? Well, the truth is, every single interaction your employees have with customers, suppliers, even friends and family impacts how your company is perceived. When your company seeks to create one image but doesn't live up to it, your brand will be perceived as inauthentic. On the flip side, when your brand aligns with the values you communicate to the market and your employees' attitudes and behaviors, the credibility of that brand identity will become a long-term source of value. Plus, not only will consumers have a more positive association with your brand, so will job seekers, which means your company stands a stronger chance of competing for the top talent. While a strong culture is positively correlated with engagement, performance, and brand image, the opposite is true for turnover and absenteeism. Studies have shown correlations between strong company cultures and turnover intentions, actual turnover trends, and absenteeism, the last of which is especially critical in hourly roles with an unreliable workforce. These negative correlations are unsurprising, knowing that a strong culture leads to higher engagement. The bottom line here is that there are real benefits to your organization focusing on and investing in initiatives and processes that strengthen its culture. By focusing on the employee experience, you really can create a culture of success. Okay, so now that we've talked about the benefits of a strong company culture, let's pause for a moment to consider how strong your organization's culture is today. Again, using the polling feature in the webinar app, make an assessment of your culture. I'll give everyone a moment to enter their answers.
And it looks like we're at about 50% of the audience has voted right now, up to 60% now.
Okay. And Charles, you mind sharing the responses with the group here?
Yep, absolutely.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you for your participation. It's looking like we have a pretty decent spread, almost a normal curve here happening. If you find yourself thinking that your organization could really use some help strengthening your culture, Outmatch and its subsidiary company, Pomelo, have a lot of great content on their websites where you can learn tips and tricks from the pros about building an engaging culture. But if you find yourself already within a decent or strong culture, but you want to find new ways to weave that culture into your existing processes, then the talent acquisition process is really a great place to start. So let's get into that. Charles, you mind going to the next slide for me? Perfect. The employee experience does not start once the candidate becomes an employee. Rather, it starts with the very first touch point that the candidate has with your organization, which occurs, of course, in the hiring process. Because of this common misperception, culture is often overlooked when developing effective hiring processes. But this is a critical mistake. Skills can be taught, but values and preferences cannot. If you truly want to make successful hires, you must hire for your company culture. After all, new hires that share the values of your company perform better and stay longer. So how can you ensure that your new employees are going to thrive in your company culture? Using these 3 secrets, you can feel confident that culture was sufficiently considered during the hiring process. The first secret is to use predictive analytics to accelerate the candidates most likely to succeed in your company. Don't waste time reviewing resumes of candidates who don't share your values. They're highly unlikely to find satisfaction at your company. Next, remember the importance of standardized interviews. Identify your core values and be sure to ask all candidates the same questions about those core values. so you can directly compare the responses of one candidate to another. Use behavioral-based interview questions that ask the candidate to discuss experiences that may resonate with your core values, and whether they are energized by the same types of challenges as your team. And don't forget documentation. Provide interviewers with resources to easily document responses in a standardized manner, making it easy to disseminate the information with others involved in the hiring process. Finally, once you know they're a good fit for culture, make sure they know it too. Too many companies focus only on compensation, benefits, and perks when making a job offer. These are easy to replicate from company to company. Instead, focus on your unique value proposition. What's unique to your organization? And that's your company culture. Use the information you've gathered about how they fit with your team to make a more compelling offer. And think about ways to make the offer personal and reflect what the candidate values and appreciates. This will be more enticing to a great candidate who might even be receiving offers from competitors. And finally, consider implementing a candidate net promoter score. This concept takes a unique twist on net promoter scores, treating your candidates like you would clients, asking for their input and seeking their praise. The candidate net promoter score shows how your company is perceived by potential employees and lets you proactively identify and address talent acquisition trouble. Once you've hired a candidate that you feel confident will be a good culture fit, now what? Contrary to popular belief, the talent acquisition process doesn't stop with the offer, but continues through early onboarding. These early days of the employee lifecycle are critical. After all, most turnover happens within the first 90 days of an employee starting. Effective onboarding can not only help reduce that early turnover, but can also help set the employee up for success in the near and long term. In fact, according to academic research literature, effective onboarding can increase retention by up to 25%. That's huge. Further, a study conducted in 2016 showed that employees who participate in a structured onboarding process were 60% more likely to stay with an organization for 3 years. 60%. You can't emphasize that number enough. The reverse is true as well, though. So a bad onboarding process can actually push new hires away from your organization. A 2014 study showed that 15% of turned employees said the lack of an effective onboarding process contributed to their decision to quit. But as you know, merely keeping an employee isn't enough. We want to retain them and get them up to speed as soon as possible, a concept we refer to as ramp-up time. An effective onboarding program can help here too. Employees who participated in an effective onboarding program are faster to achieve optimized productivity, achieve better performance overall, build stronger workplace relationships, and have higher employee engagement. Some studies show onboarding helping to improve early employee performance by up to 11%. And the results are long-lasting. A study on driving performance and engagement showed that effective onboarding increases employees' discretionary effort by as much as 20%. The fundamental bar for onboarding into a culture is whether new hires know what they need to do to be successful. Some of this relates to operational aspects of the job, but the really important stuff relates to culture because that's where the decision-making judgment comes into play. When employees understand the culture, it means they understand how the company wants them to prioritize their activities and how their behavior contributes to the overall business strategy. This obviously creates a high ROI for any new hire when it goes well. Conversely, companies that don't onboard new hires into their culture will be focused only on what is communicated to them at a tactical level and will be less able to make independent decisions that are aligned with the strategy. Thus, their ramp-up period will be longer, and the ROI of that new hire will be lower, not only in the short term, but overall. Companies typically underinvest in onboarding, which is a shame because onboarding provides an opportunity to test whether new employees will be effective at their roles. The key predictor of effectiveness in onboarding is onboarding into the company culture. So extending the onboarding process beyond the first few weeks of employment is really important. So how do you onboard into your culture? How is this done effectively? The first step is to simply take the time to truly understand which values are most important to instill in new hires, and create a strategy to make sure they are communicated clearly and consistently. Planned activities and less formal approaches are both great ways to tackle onboarding. Additionally, metrics can be used to understand how successful the onboarding process is at communicating this company culture to your new hires. By incorporating these 3 simple steps, you can be sure that your culture isn't an afterthought of the onboarding process, but instead the foundation of it. To really instill your culture into the onboarding process, the best practice is to pick a small number of employee milestones that cover the basic skills and knowledge associated with the job, as well as the company culture. Each hiring manager should be responsible for ensuring that new hires reach these job-related and cultural milestones within 60 to 90 days of joining the team. Setting a goal-oriented action plan helps new hires know exactly what is expected of them and reiterates what is really important to the organization. Okay.
Okay, so yeah, so we've reached the end of the primary part of our webinar today, and so we do have a lot of questions that came in while Chelsea was speaking, and I'm just going to kind of go through them here and ask Chelsea the questions, and then she'll give us her answers. So just give me one moment here to sort out those questions. Okay, I had one person ask me if we will be sending out the webinar slides after, and the answer is yes. So this is for everybody. We will be sending out those webinar slides in a follow-up email that'll come out about 2:15 Central Time. That's when I usually send it, about 15 minutes after the presentation is over. So you'll get those slides, and if you want the recording, please reach out to me directly at csummers@outmatch.com. Otherwise, it'll be on our webinars page on our website, which is outmatch.com/webinars. Going to the next question here. This one comes in from Logan, and it is, what types of metrics do companies use to measure onboarding success? And so I'll turn that over to you, Chelsea.
Absolutely, great question. So the first one that comes to mind, of course, is a topic we brought up in the actual webinar here, is ramp-up time. So when you identify certain milestones that an employee should be hitting in order to be effective in their job, once you've identified those milestones, you can now start to measure how quickly your employee is hitting those milestones. And that's a really key indicator of how successful your onboarding program is. Another key milestone, of course, is looking at turnover. Another key metric is looking at turnover. So if you start to see your turnover is significantly higher than industry average for the first 90 days, then you might consider that there could be a problem with your onboarding process. So there might be a breakdown happening there. And then finally, of course, is just polling your employees. So asking for feedback on the effectiveness of your onboarding directly from those who are impacted by it, those new hires. Getting that feedback will help not only understand how effective your onboarding process is, it'll also provide maybe some insights and recommendations on how to improve it. Good question.
Great. Yeah, thanks. And I'll just quick add to that a little bit. And if you do want to kind of like measure measure the ROI that you can get from, improving your onboarding processes and things like that. We do have a number of calculators, and so I mentioned earlier that we're doing the free talent analysis with one of our experts. If you're interested, and we can definitely look at some ROI and metrics and things like that with you in that analysis. So you'll be prompted in that email that comes out after this, as well as the survey that goes out after this webinar as well. So just want to move on to the next question here. This one comes in from Daniel. What do I do if I'm not sure we have a strong culture? I'm assuming I need to figure that out first before aligning onboarding processes to it. Yes.
Absolutely. So what's neat about what's happening in the talent assessment space right now is there's now so much more ability to analyze and measure your corporate culture. Tools like Pomelo, which Charles, I'm sure you can speak to a little bit more as well, offer some really quantitative insights into how strong your culture is, and then breaking it down not only from an organizational standpoint, but looking at your individual teams. So how strong are your different departments or your different teams, right? If you still aren't sure if you have a strong culture, or that your talent and your analytics indicate that there might be some improvements to be had, there are a lot of ways that you can start to strengthen that culture, but it all boils down to identifying what culture you have and what culture you'd like to have and where those differences are. Charles, do you want to add Pomelo information there?
Sorry if you heard a large bang in the background. We've got something going on upstairs with construction, so I apologize. And so I didn't get your question there, Chelsea, because it was a little bit loud in here. I apologize.
I was just mentioning Pomelo, and so if you could provide some information on where they can get additional information on that tool.
Yeah, absolutely. So either you can reach out to me directly again at csummers@outmatch.com. Otherwise, go ahead and just schedule a demo on our website or go to our Contact Us page. Any one of those methods works. We'll put you in touch with an expert on Pomelo specifically to kind of walk you through that tool, get you a demo, talk about your what kind of challenges you're seeing as far as culture goes, things like that. So, yep. So I'll just move on to the next question here. What is the difference between onboarding and training?
Yeah, so this question I think is kind of in a similar vein as the question around engagement and culture. They seem very related. They seem almost dependent on each other. So the difference here is training and onboarding are also related. And in fact, training does take up a significant portion of the onboarding process. You have to include role-specific, job-specific training in your onboarding process to ensure your employee gets up to speed quickly. But the two aren't the same. So onboarding is an experience of feeling welcomed and becoming a part of the group of people joined by a common purpose. It's again more of that emotional feeling. You understand you're starting to build bonds with the people you're going to be working with. Whereas training is a much more tactical component of onboarding. You're teaching your employees to understand their role and responsibilities. So yes, training is absolutely important, but think about how you want the new hire to feel and then create that experience with the onboarding process.
Thank you, Chelsea. And so I actually have two questions coming in from Gloria. And so I'll start with the first one here, and then we'll move on to our second one here. And so the first question is, how do we relay culture in a company that has varying cultures throughout the various brands in its portfolio?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that, Charles?
Yep. How do we relay culture in a company that has varying cultures throughout the various brands in its portfolio?
Yeah,
how do you extend culture across those various brands?
Yeah, that's a great question, because you will notice that certain teams, certain departments are going to place higher value on certain aspects of your culture than others. The important thing here is to identify what are those core values that your organization wants everybody in the organization, regardless of their team, regardless of their department, to really buy into and to prioritize their behavior off of. So once you can identify that common thread, that's the culture that you can start to build your onboarding process off of.
Great. And so Gloria's second question is, what are your thoughts on culture fit versus culture add?
Okay. So I'm not sure I'm really understanding the culture add component. Are you referring to changing your culture or making a shift in your culture? Not sure if Gloria can jump in here.
Yeah, so I think if Gloria can maybe just write in a response to Chelsea's question there on what you mean by culture add, then we'll get back to that question here. The next question is coming from Anita.
Okay.
How do companies prevent or protect themselves from discrimination if their company values screen out protected class applicants, i.e. seniors, et cetera?
Mm-hmm. It's a great question. So similar to the way we can legally justify job fit when we do have some sort of screen out against different groups, the same holds true for culture fit. So if you can show that individuals who value your organization's value do perform better within your organization, there is a clear quantitative, measurable relationship there, then you can still legally select candidates based on that criteria. So it goes down to really tying that culture fit to real results, to performance improvements or less turnover or any of those other indicators of success that we look at when we're implementing a talent assessment. That's a great question. And yeah, and if you are working with Pamela, with Outmatch, with another consultant on implementing some of these processes or some of these considerations into your talent acquisition process, they should monitor that adverse impact for you and ensure that there isn't anything funky going on. And if there is, there's a reason why. It's justifiable and it makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks. And so our last, actually, we've got a couple more. And so this one comes in from Aaliyah, and it looks like she's saying that her company is currently trying to change its culture and just would like some tips for promoting this change across the company and keeping their employees engaged in this change. And so my first comment is definitely, Aaliyah, let's set you up with a time to talk with one of our experts so we can go a little bit more in depth. But I'll turn it over to Chelsea to kind of talk to that a little bit about best practices.
Yeah, I love this question because this really ties into some of what we talked about today. The key here is ingraining that new culture, ingraining those new values that your company wants to really embody, those behaviors into all of your employee experiences. So with today's webinar, we focused on the talent acquisition process. How can we start to hire for culture fit? How can we onboard for culture? Weave that into the onboarding process. But there are other employee experiences or other touch points that leadership operations has on the employee, of course. So those day-to-day touch points of leadership style, communication, even things like incentive programs. So what does your performance management system look like and how does that reflect your values? What are your reward or incentive programs and how does that reflect your values? So taking a look at the entire employee life cycle, those key employee touch points, and finding ways to start to weave in your new values, behaviors, your organizational culture will really start to help it become a real shift instead of just a desired one.
Great answer. Okay, so we've actually come to our last questions here. Actually, you know what? Gloria just wrote back in. I'll look at that one, but I'm going to read this other question. So we've got this one and one more. And this question is, are there simple ways that organizations can identify culture disconnects or detractors during the onboarding process? What are best practices to create efficient and meaningful feedback loops?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. So I'll answer the second part first. The way to create those feedback loops is to do timely, in-the-moment feedback. And that starts with training, coaching your hiring managers, either the individuals who are responsible for onboarding, your trainers, whoever it is that has immediate feedback access to that new hire, training them to be comfortable giving in-the-moment feedback so that when the time comes, you can kind of catch that and intervene, and it doesn't feel out of the blue, right? Constant, in-the-moment feedback is really what's going to be most effective here. And the first part of that question, Charles, can you read that to me again?
The question I just asked, or Gloria's first question?
The question you just asked. I want to make sure I answered both parts for our participant here.
Yep, absolutely. Are there simple ways that organizations can identify culture disconnects or detractors during the onboarding experience?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a unique question, because when we look at onboarding disconnects, what we'd like to do is avoid those by really ensuring that the candidate's a good fit in the hiring process, right? We want to hire for good culture fit. We want to communicate that culture to the candidate and make sure that they're bought in. But of course, you're going to have individuals who slip through the cracks. So the way you're able to see culture and the way it becomes more tangible is through behaviors, right? So looking at somebody's behaviors is going to give you an indication of whether or not they're embodying the value, the culture that vibes well with your organization. And so going back to that suggestion around laying out milestones that are role specific in the onboarding process, but also laying out milestones that are cultural specific. So for example, maybe your culture really values collaboration. It really values open door policy. It's really a team-oriented place to work. Maybe one of those onboarding milestones is the individual setting up time to go meet with X amount of people or to go out to lunch with X amount of people. So if you start to see that they're not doing that, they aren't taking initiative to really build those relationships, well, that could be a disconnect or a red flag there, because the behavior is not matching the value, and you've got this clear milestone to show you that.
Great, thank you. All right, so we're going to get back to Gloria's question here. And so her original question was, what are your thoughts on culture fit versus culture add? And then she wrote back in and just let us and kind of define that for us. And culture add has been defined as someone who shares the same values but can bring something new to the team as well. And so, you know, culture fit being more like candidates that look like us, think like us, and then, you know, that's the difference between the two of them. So she just wants to know your thoughts on the differences between those two things.
Okay, I'm following you now. So culture is a little bit unique. When culture fit is unique when we think about it in relationship to job fit. Job fit, we really do want to get kind of as close to the grain as possible in terms of you have the knowledge, skills, abilities, personality type that will make you successful. But if you can bring things above and beyond to the table, that's fantastic. Culture is a little bit different, because what we're asking here is, which values do you prioritize the most? So for example, going back to my collaborative, very team-oriented type of environment, if you have an individual who doesn't prioritize that value, doesn't even, maybe it ranks pretty low on their list of values, you're going to have a jangly culture, and that's going to cause some behavioral issues. You might start to see performance lacking, engagement lacking, turnover occurring, etc. So I would encourage that positive culture fit, and then looking at the add happening with more of the role-specific knowledge, competencies, experience, education that somebody would bring to the table.
Thank you. Yeah, so I mean that brings us to the end of our questions. I hope we answered them all, you know, to your satisfaction. And If you have any other questions, please reach out to me, and I'll put you in touch with one of our experts or Chelsea so we can get those answers or so we can get those questions answered. Again, my email address is csummers, just like the season, at outmatch.com. So with that being said, I'm going to jump on to my last slide here. And so thank you all for attending part 3 of our Hiring Success series. If you missed parts 1 or 2, which covered sourcing, screening, and interviewing, and would like to listen back, please just go to outmatch.com/webinar or shoot me an email. Those recordings are on our site. You can also find them on YouTube as well if you'd like to look there. Our next webinar dives into the challenges of ATS integration. Join us as we present a case study on integrating an assessment with your ATS, what to ask, what to avoid, how to get up and running faster, so you can enjoy a more effective recruitment process. And so I hope to see you all again next month. And once again, I just want to thank you for joining us today.